you see that?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll read this because we can read it out loud. Given the closer alignment to Gen 8 platforms in terms of performance and our previous offerings on PS4/Xbox One, it is reasonable to assume that we could make something compelling for NG Switch as well. Is that correct, Mr. Kotick?
That's what it says.
Mr. Kotick, Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 is not the same as Call of Duty Warzone, right?
No.
Modern Warfare 2 can't be played on a phone, right?
The console game for PS5 and Xbox Series X couldn't be played on it.
There isn't a Modern Warfare 2 for the phone, right?
You'll get to the point where a lot of that content will be playable on the phone.
But today it's not. You said playing Modern Warfare 2 on a phone would be like using a refrigerator for a safe, right?
I think so.
Mr. Kotick, Microsoft agreed to buy Activision at $95 a share, right?
Yes.
That's an extremely large premium, right?
It was a great premium for our shareholders.
And you own approximately 4.3 million shares in Activision, right?
Exactly the number, but
I just did rough math, but if the deal closes, your stock would then be worth approximately $408 million, right?
with your rough math, yes.
And further, Your Honor. Thank you.
Let's talk about the few times that you allowed any of your games to go into a library content subscription service. When you did that, did you ever allow those games to go in day and date?
No, I don't believe so.
Why is that?
In most of those experiments, we were using titles that were old.
Did you have them in those subscription services for a limited time period?
Yes, I believe for the most part they were implemented. Some might have been for a longer period of time, but they were all a bit on here that wasn't really being commercialized.
And as the CEO of the independent Activision, is it your best business judgment that today it's not in your shareholders' financial interest to put Call of Duty games into a subscription service day and day? You were talking to Her Honor about what would happen when Microsoft and Xbox acquire Activision. Do you believe they have a different perspective on what's in the best interest of their shareholders once they own the content?
Yes, from what I understand, they think that there's a greater opportunity for that.
Have you seen the content that they own, their first-party games, and whether they do put those into their Game Pass subscription day and date today? So are you aware that some of Xbox's own games are in Game Pass today?
Yes.
And they are in their day and date?
I can't be certain, but I'll take the word for it.
And PlayStation has its own subscription service, correct?
Yes.
And it has its own games in their content library subscription service, right?
Subscription service,
correct? So, yes.
And are you aware that Mr. Ryan has made a different business judgment about whether it's appropriate to put those games in day and date?
I was not aware of that.
Do you think that your team at Activision, working in concert with the engineers, developers at Xbox, will be able to put a version of Call of Duty onto the Nintendo Switch?
The current Switch?
Yes.
Yeah.
You believe working together, they can make the technical adjustments or refine the game in a way that will be a good gaming experience on the Switch?
Yes, I think we can make a good game for this one.
On the mobile, Warzone mobile, you were asked about other mobile games, the early ones you've developed that were not made in-house by Activision Blizzard King, correct?
Yes,
Told us earlier that you're going to be putting Warzone onto the mobile phone, right?
that's correct.
Is that game being developed in-house at Activision or by another third party?
Internally.
Anything further?
Mobile game you just responded to Ms. Wilkinson's questions about that you said was going to be released. When is that going to be released?
I think we're currently planning for the fall.
Is that when it was planned to be released initially?
I think it was planned for earlier, but we had some delays.
Thank you. No further questions.
All right. That ends your testimony. You are excused.
Thank you very much.
I don't know who's going next. So who's our next witness?
Honor, I think we were going to resume the testimony of Dr. Bailey.
Great. Sure.
I approach to return this to Dr. Bailey.
Yes. You can take the stand.
Welcome back, Dr. Bailey.
Morning.
Thanks for being flexible. When we left off yesterday, you were discussing Nintendo and PC's competitive success without Call of Duty. Did you form an opinion as to whether those products are properly excluded from the product market, in this case for hardware?
Nintendo and PC, I did.
Did you hear during Ms. Wilkinson's cross of Dr. Lee yesterday that Sony has represented to regulators that the Nintendo Switch is a principal rival?
I did.
And did you do any economic analysis to try to evaluate whether that's the case?
Yeah, I did.
I'll ask you to turn to slide 23, and Roger, if we could go to slide 23, that would be great. But this means I think this one's in camera, so. Doctor, could you explain the analysis that you did looking at the Nintendo Switch?
Sure. We talked yesterday about telemetry data, and this chart that's on the screen, the green is Xbox telemetry. It's based on Xbox telemetry data, and the blue is based on PlayStation telemetry data. And so the question at hand is whether the Nintendo Switch is an important rival, a competitive constraint on Xbox and on PlayStation. And I was able to look at that question by considering what happened when the Nintendo Switch entered in 2017.
And how did you do that analysis?
Sure. So in economics, we have a technique that's called difference in difference. And the reason why I use that technique is gaming, there's seasonal features to it. So I wanted to be as sure as I could that the effect that I was picking up was the effect of the Nintendo Switch entry on Xbox and PlayStation, not the ordinary fluctuations that might come from seasonality.
So how'd you do that?
So what I looked at is if Nintendo Switch mattered to competition on Xbox and PlayStation, then when the Nintendo Switch entered, what I would expect to see is an effect on gamer behavior. And so this chart that's up on the screen, there were two ways in which I looked at gamer behavior. One was the change in the number of active gamers, the number of gamers on the console, on the Xbox console and the PC and the PlayStation console. And then the other way that I looked at a change in gamer behavior was I looked for whether there was a change in game time hours. How even those people who continued to play, did they change the number of hours that they were gaming? And this chart shows the result of that study.
Without talking about the numbers, did you see a rise or a fall?
So I saw a fall. And so what's on the left-hand side is you can see the decline in the number, the percentage decline in the number of gamers on the Xbox console, and then next to it on the blue line, the blue bar, the decline in the number of gamers on the PC, on the PlayStation console. And then the right-hand side of the chart, you can see for those gamers that stayed, how the game time hours changed. And you can see a decline there both on the Xbox and on the PlayStation console.
What does this tell you about substitution, Dr. Bailey?
Well, this is what I would expect to see if there was substitution. If gamers on Xbox and PlayStation considered the Nintendo Switch a substitute, this is what I would expect to see, and that's what I found.
Can I ask you, I think if I recall from your report, you looked at data for 10 weeks.
Yes, that's correct.
So did that same decline then exist past the 10 weeks? In other words, one of the arguments is that the Switch performance is not as good. So one might think that initially consumers would buy it. And then if they thought, oh, not as good, then they'd go back to their Xbox or PlayStation. So what did you see past the 10 weeks?
So the challenge, so I didn't look past 10 weeks. And here's why, is because there's a lot of things that happen in this world, and I wanted to be able to isolate the effect. And so the longer we go out, the more events that start to come in, and the harder it is to start to control for what's happening. So that's why I focused right on that period.
So do you, all right. So the opinion you draw is that at least when it came out, consumers played on it and purchased it.
Not only did they play on it and purchase it, but more specifically, Xbox gamers and PlayStation gamers switched. They switched entirely their gaming behavior, and they switched in part their
No
gaming
pun intended.
behavior. Yes.
Okay. For at least that 10-week period.
For at least that 10-week period. And as an economist, it's informative to substitution because, you know, you could imagine it was a whole different set of gamers, that it wasn't pulling from PlayStation or from Xbox. And that's not what this analysis shows. It shows that kind of substitution.
Doctor, did you do any other analysis of comparability between Switch and the other platforms we've talked about?
I did, and it's complementary to this analysis, yes.
Go to the next slide. And can we please turn the public feedback on or publish? What do we see here, Doctor?
So what I have here is a collection of the popular games that are played on Xbox, and those are all the green checks on this chart. And what I'm showing is that those same set of popular games are also available on Nintendo.
And are some of these games available to be played between folks on Nintendo and folks on the Xbox?
Cross-platform play? Yes. Yes.
Did you do a similar analysis for the PlayStation?
I did. I did the same kind of analysis for PlayStation games, and many of the popular PlayStation games, those are the blue checks, are also available for play on Nintendo.
And what does all that tell you about the product?
Well, the taken holistically, the collection of these economic studies plus the testimony and the documents in the record that I reviewed, these are all consistent with Nintendo being considered a rival by Xbox and by PlayStation.
We've heard some testimony that the PlayStation 5 and the Switch are sold at different price points. Does that change your analysis?
No, because certainly with respect to the PlayStation S and the Switch, they're priced the same at $299.99.
At PlayStation, do you mean that?
Oh, I apologize. The Nintendo. I'm looking at PlayStation.
And Doctor, what does it do from a share perspective if Nintendo is included in the global console market?
Sure. So what I'm showing here are 3 ways to measure console shares: by revenue, by units, or by installed base. And no matter which metric we use, Xbox is the 3rd place console.
Has that generally been true for the last 5 years?
Yes, it's generally true. Yeah.
Were you here yesterday when Mr. Ryan testified that PC is a very direct competitor to the PlayStation?
I did hear that testimony.
Were you able to look at telemetry data to determine whether there's similar substitution on the PC?
So I testified yesterday that I asked for telemetry data, but telemetry data wasn't available in a systematic or robust way for me to look at it for PC. So I didn't have that available.
Did you try to do any analysis of comparability between PCs and consoles?
I did.
What did you find?
Well, that's what's on this chart here. What I'm showing here in my report, I have many more games, but here, these are the top 15 games that are played on Xbox and on PlayStation. And you can see all of those top 15 games are also available for play on PC.
And similar questions before, can some of these games be played between PCs and consoles?
Yes, there's cross-platform play.
So were you able to come to an opinion as to whether Nintendo and PC can properly be excluded from a hardware market in this case?
I was. Based on the economic analyses that I've done, the data-driven ones, as well as my review of the testimony and the documents, that Nintendo and PC are properly included in that relevant market. The Dr. Lee's market is too narrow.
A few more topics, Dr. Bailey.
Well, before, can you just sort of expand on that? So why does the fact that they're available on both PC and same games, you can play the same games on both. There's some games you can even cross play. What is it from the economic point of view that means they should be considered in the same market?
Sure. So when we looked at what happened when the Switch entered, from a data-driven economic perspective, that's my heart and soul, that's the kind of data that tells you real-world behavior. You don't have to guess about what's going on or think about a model of what's going on. You can look at the data, and the data tells you what are those gamers doing. And that's what I see when I look at this event of what happened to the Xbox gamers and the PlayStation gamers when the Switch entered. I see pardon the pun, they switched.
And the fact that they have the same games, that's just enables them to switch. If they couldn't play the same games, and you would think, well, it might be a different market because you can't. You'd have to play completely different games. But because they can play the same games, to you, it seems like an appropriate substitute.
Yeah, it's additive for me. So it may be that different games are substitutes. So, you have your time, and what you're really substituting is how you spend your time. But it's additive and more robust for me that it's in fact the same games, so that you could substitute to a different device and play different games or play the same games.
Since you didn't have the data for the PC, and you heard Professor Lee say, well, the PC, the price difference is greater. What do you say to that? In other words, I'd have to spend $1,500, I believe he testified, to buy a PC.
Yeah, so I was here yesterday and I heard that testimony. I guess on my review of the documents and the testimony is that many gamers multi-home. they already have a PC. And in my report, I talk about it, and I'm not going to remember exactly what footnote's sitting here, but I talk about the percentage of gamers that multi-home with PC, and it's a large percentage. And so that construct of having to go out and buy a PC, I mean, maybe some do, but more likely because many of them already multi-home with a PC, that substitution is made.
Doctor, you aware that Dr. Lee also defines a product market of multi-game library subscription services?
Yes, I am.
And did you hear during cross-examination that he said he looked primarily at documents because there wasn't quite as much data here?
Yes,
Did you try to do any analysis based on data?
I did.
This next slide is the camera. Thank you. Dr. Bailey, what did you look at in trying to assess whether subscription and buy-to-play games are different markets?
Sure. So this goes back to the telemetry data. I had available to me Xbox telemetry data. And what I was able to look at to assess that question of are subscription services and buy-to-play games, do they compete? Are they two ways basically to monetize the same game? And so what I was able to look at was I took the set of games that were added to Game Pass, and I asked what happened to their buy-to-play sales when those games were added to Game Pass. Because if they were substitutes, I would expect the buy-to-play sales to decline. And I know it's on the screen. So if you look at the top horizontal row of that slide, that percentage in black bold, that's what my analysis showed. And maybe too much in the weeds, but I did the same kind of analysis using this economic tool of difference in difference. So you can control for that to the extent there's any seasonality, you're able to control for that.
Was that the only thing you looked at?
It's not the only thing I looked at. I could look at the reverse of that. So what happened when games were removed from Game Pass? What happened to those buy-to-play sales when that game was removed from Game Pass? And what you can see in the second row, that percentage that's in black and in bold that's the percentage increase in buy-to-play sales on average of the games when they get removed from Game Pass. So that same game, those buy-to-play sales increase by that percentage that's there.
And what does this analysis tell you about substitutability?
From an economic perspective, this is strong, robust evidence of substitution, gamer substitution between subscription services and buy-to-play.
Last topic on markets, Dr. Bailey, is cloud gaming. Similar question. You're aware that Dr. Lee defines a product market of cloud gaming services? I mean, I get the words exactly right.
Yes, I am.
And here too, were you able to try to look at some data to determine what we can assess about whether this is a separate market or not?
Yes, I was able to look at that.
Next slide is the not in camera listening. What did you look at and what did you find, Dr. Bailey?
So what's here is also telemetry data from Xbox, and that green line shows you the monthly total gaming hours on console between 2019 and the start of 2020. And just in case there's a question, what's the big flip in the middle? That's COVID. That's everyone saying public. And then the orange line, that's cloud gaming hours.
And what does this data tell you about how and why people are using cloud gaming on Xbox?
Sure. So I found this informative. Is this public?
Yes.
Okay. So this was informative to me because cloud gaming hours is less than 1% of console gaming hours. So it's very, very small. But in addition to just its small nature, I was able to look at how cloud gaming is used by gamers. And so on Xbox, in order to access the cloud
gaming, it's through the Game Pass Ultimate subscription. There's a feature for cloud gaming, and I could look to see how those gamers of Game Pass Ultimate were using cloud gaming. And what I found was that of those Game Pass Ultimate gamers, a very small fraction of them access the cloud gaming feature. Their proportion of game time hours through cloud gaming are even smaller. When they access that cloud gaming feature, the overwhelming majority of them are accessing it at least once through a console. And that in and of itself, to me, there's some substitution there between console and cloud because they're accessing through the console. And then the last thing that I was able to look at through the telemetry data was once they were on the cloud, how were they using it? And the data is consistent with those gamers when they use the cloud, using the cloud to try out a game. It's not sustained game playing. It is largely playing one game they've never played before and not playing it ever again, other than that one day that they tried it.
So I think Ms. Bond testified that at least that what she was seeing was that gamers would use the cloud to play the game while they were downloading, say they had bought the game. And while they were downloading it, they would use it. Is the data that you saw consistent with that?
It's exactly, it would be exactly.
And Dr. Bailey, did you hear the testimony of Mr. Zimring from Google about their cloud service?
I did.
And what did you take away from that as an economist?
Well, as an economist, what I took away was the competitive constraint he was facing was from console and PC as well.
So what does that tell you about whether cloud gaming is a separate product market?
Well, when a product faces strong competition from another product, typically we think about those products in the same relevant market.
Just one final topic, Doctor. We've heard throughout the trial that Call of Duty is available on Xbox, PC, PlayStation, and mobile. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Yes, they do.
Are you aware of the contract that Microsoft has signed to bring Call of Duty to the Nintendo platforms if the transaction closes?
Yeah.
And the 5 other contracts with cloud streaming providers? Do you have an understanding of whether those contracts are contingent on the deal going through as to Call of Duty?
I'm not a lawyer, but that's how I interpret that. Yes, it's contingent.
So as an economist, what does that signify to you about the effects of the transaction on output?
It means the transaction is output expanding. It expands the availability of the Activision video game content to more gamers. It brings more games.
Your Honor, that's all we have for him.
Your Honor, my colleague, Mr. Alex Ansaldo, will be conducting the processing.
Morning, Your Honor. Maybe approach with the witness line.
You may.
Morning, Dr. Bailey. I just wanted to touch on the last point you're raising with respect to the conditional contracts that you view as an output-enhancing feature of the merger. If any merging firm committed to cutting prices conditioned on the merger being approved, would you consider that a merger-specific efficiency?
Gosh, I would certainly consider it. I mean, that's very broad. I would consider it.
Turning back to demonstrative 29, which we were just discussing. This is your demonstrative. That's based on solely on Xbox data.
It's Xbox telemetry data.
And this demonstrates people are using cloud on console. Is that right?
Xbox gamer.
Xbox games are using Xbox cloud on Xbox consoles.
The majority of the Xbox Game Pass Ultimate gamers that access cloud, the majority of them, at least once, are accessing cloud through a console, through their console.
Using them both at the same time.
They're using the console to access cloud. I guess if you're thinking about that, it's at the same time, and that's the way they're doing it.
They're not really substituting between xCloud and Xbox console in the chart that you displayed.
I disagree. If you have a console that you're using to access cloud, by definition, you have a console.
Your view, someone is using a console to access the cloud. You view that as substitution between cloud and console?
I view it as strong evidence of the ability to substitute, because there's nothing else you do with the console. I mean, maybe a clever teenager figures out like you could make something else with it, but the console is no good without the game. So if you have a console, you have a console to play games on it. And so when you're when I can see Xbox gamers accessing the cloud through a console, it tells me they have a console for playing games.
I'd like to ask some more questions about relevant product market in this case. Yesterday afternoon and this morning, you discussed a number of figures describing the various features of gaming. All that. But in antitrust terms, the relevant product market is the set of products to which consumers can turn in the face of a price increase.
I think that's one way. It's one way it's described. I don't think it's the only way, but it's one way it's described.
Finding a relevant product market requires identifying the set of products that impose a competitive constraint.
Correct.
Those are products that, from the consumer's perspective, are reasonable substitutes.
Yes.
You're not offering an opinion as to what the correct product market actually is in this case.
I think that's right. I think my opinions are around the largely the data-driven evidence, but also the documents and testimony that I've seen that speak to the relevant markets that Dr. Lee has defined and that they're tuned up.
You never performed a hypothetical monopolist. Right?
Well, the analyses that I do speak directly to the hypothetical monopolist test concept.
What do you mean when you say speak to?
Well, the hypothetical monopolist test is one way to think about identifying where that nexus of competition is. And so all of the analyses that I talked through yesterday and the ones that I talked to now this morning, they speak to substitution. They speak to gamer behavior, and that speaks to the nexus of competition, what those competitive constraints are.
Didn't actually perform a hypothetical.
Well, I guess I'm not sure what you mean by that. Because there are many ways to do a hypothetical monopolist test, and the work that I did speaks to that.
I guess I'm having trouble with the phrase, you say your work speaks to it. But the term hypothetical monopolist test appears 5 times in your report. Each of those is in reference to the hypothetical monopolist test that Dr. Lee performed.
So maybe that's the point of disagreement, is I disagree that Dr. Lee did a hypothetical monopoly test. He says he did a critical loss test and he transforms that language into saying an aggregate diversion ratio. And I disagree that that's what he did. I understand he's calling it that, but I disagree with that.
Understood, but you also did not perform a hypothetical.
But to the extent that Dr. Lee brought information to bear on that question, I brought information to bear on that question.
You're not offering an opinion as to whether consumers would substitute purchases of high performance consoles for purchases of other devices in response to a price increase.
That question was
You're not offering an opinion as to whether consumers would substitute from purchases of high performance consoles to purchases of other devices in response to a price increase.
Well, I disagree. I think that that's what my analysis of the Nintendo Switch entry speaks to.
You didn't study purchases of consoles, right? You studied gamer behavior and devices they already own.
For in economics, we can have a wish list of the kind of data that we want to do a study, but it's not always available. And so the analyses that I did with the data that was available to me they inform that question. They speak to that question on substitution, how gamers behave.
Recall yesterday, Mr. Killaroo asked you questions about your conclusions with respect to geographic market.
I do.
Discussed some of the facts that your analyses showed and that you considered, including indications that across geographies, games are similar, devices are similar, release dates are similar, gamer demographics are similar. Recall that portion of your testimony?
I do.
You'd agree that a Taco Bell in Washington, D.C. and a Taco Bell in San Francisco could also have similar menu items, similar graphic design and marketing, similar item sales, similar customer demographics, right?
Asking me to imagine. I could imagine.
You could imagine that a Taco Bell in Washington, D.C. and a Taco Bell in San Francisco would share those similar features.
I've not done a study of that, but if you're asking me the hypothetical, I could imagine.
So let's assume they do. But that similarity doesn't mean they're in the same geographic.
Well, what's important for understanding the answer to that question is where the nexus of those competitive decisions are being made. Are they being made locally at the Taco Bell in San Francisco? And I apologize, I forgot the other geography already. Are they being made locally, or are they being made, there's in retail, which would be kind of like Taco Bell, there's omni-channel, that the decisions are around pricing, around selection are not made at the local level. It's omni-channel. It's made at a level higher up. And so to evaluate that question, it is around the nexus of where those competitive decisions get made. And that's what I talked about yesterday and the items you just talked about. Now, the nexus of the decision making for consoles, it's the same product and the same brands and the same devices. Those nexuses are being made at a level that's broader than the United States.
You're aware that Microsoft recently announced a price increase for Xbox and Game Pass in certain geographies, but not others.
You showed me a document in my deposition, so I'm aware through that. I don't, as we talked about, I do not think it undermines my opinion at all, but I am aware of it.
Based on your opinions, you don't have any expectation as to how consumers will respond to those price increases.
Can you ask that question one more time?
Based on the analyses that you've conducted, you don't have any expectation as to how consumers will respond to those price increases.
To all of them together, or I need a little more precision in that.
And to any price change by Xbox, analysis that you performed doesn't give you an expectation as to how a consumer will respond.
Well, what you're proposing is not the precise study that I did, but the work that I did tells me that the Nintendo Switch is a substitute. The PlayStation console is a substitute. PC gaming, through the analysis that I've done and through the testimony and documents that I've viewed, I believe is a substitute. So that's informative to me that it may affect gamer behavior. I haven't studied it. I don't know what would happen, and I don't even know the reason why that price is being changed. But I do believe my analyses do speak to that.
Backing up a little bit, in general, you're not offering an opinion as to whether consumers can substitute to purchases outside the United States in response to a price increase in the United States.
I think this is a question that I was asked yesterday, and if yours is slightly different, you can stop me and adjust. But this is not an industry where we're talking about their other products or other devices or other brands outside of the United States that a consumer would substitute to, that it is the same products and the same brands and the same devices, and that nexus of competition is happening at a level broader than the US.
You're offering no opinion as to whether Xbox increased its prices in certain geographies, such as the United States. Consumers in the United States would be able to purchase Xboxes outside the United States.
That's not a component of my opinion on my end.
You're not offering an opinion as to how close of a substitute PCs are for gaming.
I think I'm offering the analysis that's contained in my report and that we talked about here, is that it's the same type of games, and that many console and PC gamers multi-phone.
You're offering no opinion as to how close of a substitute Switch is for Xbox and PlayStation consoles.
I'm offering the opinion that it is a substitute, that it is an important rival, that it is a competitive constraint.
Your conclusion that it's a competitive constraint is based on your observations of gaming behavior on the consoles that are described in your report and your demonstratives today.
But I think it's much stronger than observation. It's a quantitative, data-driven analysis set up using a difference in difference approach, which is a robust technique in economics. It's more than observation.
You didn't have the data of console sales to consider, to see how consumers respond to price increases on one product.
It's true that sometimes the data that I would hope to have is just not available to me.
As a result, you have no basis today to opine as to whether, without the transaction, consumers would substitute from Xbox to PlayStation in response to a price increase, such as the one that Xbox recently announced.
I disagree with that. I think the starting point from Dr. Lee's report was that Xbox and
PlayStation are in the same relevant market. And the analyses that I did with the telemetry data that I talked about speak to the gamer substitution to the Nintendo console. And we talked about substitution to PC. The
But my question was about substitution between Xbox and PlayStation. And so I'll rephrase it a little bit. You don't have any basis to know Call of Duty gamers, for example, an Xbox would substitute for PlayStation, Xbox doubled its price.
that's not an
Turning to the importance of Activision content, we looked at a variety of figures during your direct examination that you rely on in reaching your opinion that Activision content, including Call of Duty, is not, quote, essential, critical, must have, or uniquely important. And so those are a lot of adjectives. I'm just wondering, so we're all on the same page. Are those synonyms for each other?
Yes, for this purpose, I'm using them that way. That I've seen all of those terms being used in this matter, and I guess I just wanted to be complete with those terms.
We turn to your demonstrative, please. And that Dr. Bailey.
I do.
Looking first just at the revenue column. Am I correct that this shows Activision gets roughly 60% of its revenue in sales within the United States?
So you're asking me to compare 2.097 billion to 1.298.
Well, actually, first I should ask, does the global revenue include the United States revenue?
Yes, I consider the United States part of global.
And so like 1.2 is roughly 60%. See,
I'll take the representation. I'm good at math, but not on the fly.
this is one of the pieces of information you use to assess the importance of Activision content.
It was a starting point for me. I think that's how I characterized it, is that it's where I started, because what I had seen with Dr. Lee's report was that it was important content, and that I think he was even stronger than that, saying that that Activision had market power. And so and it wasn't explained in a particular relevant market. And so as a starting point for me, I wanted to understand where he was coming from. I wanted to try to appreciate his point of view. And that's why I put this together.
So if we subtract Activision's, actually, the United States AAA revenue for Activision Blizzard is the same as all of its revenue in the United States.
So yes, as shown here, and just flagging that, as I talked about yesterday, AAA is a little bit, you know it when you see it. Different people have different views of what's AAA content. So to get my arms around that, I use Nielsen super data, and that's what aligns in Nielsen.
But based on the criteria you used for AAA, all of Activision's revenue in the United States is from AAA base.
That's probably right. I don't see all the decimal points out there, but that's probably
We subtract Activision's United States revenue from the global revenue. We could compare Activision's revenue share in the United States with its revenue share outside the United States.
Are you back to asking is 1.298 billion 60% of 2.097 billion?
So on the, you see that Activision Blizzard has roughly 12% share in the United States.
I see that.
The global share percentage includes Activision's United States revenue.
Correct. That 2.097 billion in the United States revenue that's down below 1.29 billion.
So if we remove the United States revenue from the global revenue, Activision's share of global revenue would actually be much smaller.
I don't know if that's right. Like why? What? Because it would change my denominator too. I don't understand what calculation you're doing. That I would remove the United States from global Activision Blizzard, but then I would leave the rest of global the same, including the United States.
We can, and just so that we can all get on the same page, you agree that Call of Duty is important. You just disagree that it's a unicorn.
I agree that Activision Blizzard, in particular, what I was talking about was Call of Duty, because that's kind of the crux of this matter. I agree that Call of Duty is an important and popular game. What my data-driven analyses show is that it's not uniquely important or must-have or essential content.
Can I ask you, because you testified yesterday to Sony, how important it was, and you showed, somebody stop me if I'm saying something that's not supposed to be public, that the, you call it the Thor game, what it's the God.
You can say I said it. It's God of War.
God of War, right? God of War, that from a revenue point of view was more important to Sony than Call of Duty. But God of War is exclusive to Sony and Call of Duty is not. So that makes sense, right? Because everyone who plays God of War has to play on a PlayStation, some other Sony, but Call of Duty is diffuse and set out. And I know we know that people own Xboxes and PCs and PlayStation. So they're spreading their Call of Duty dollars out. So doesn't your analysis, how does that, so by saying that it may be more important to Sony, but that doesn't necessarily reflect on how important it is to the industry as a whole, because those Call of Duty dollars are being spread out, but God of War is only on Sony.
So I think I understand what you're asking. So I'm going to try to answer, but if it's not the question, cut me off. So the reason why I looked at that analysis the way I did with respect to Sony is that the concern that is being raised and that Dr. Lee was looking at was with respect to foreclosure on Sony PlayStation. And so it made sense to me to look at that question about spending or importance with respect to the Sony PlayStation. I entirely agree that Call of Duty is available on other platforms. But with respect to the question of what happens to Sony, it made sense for me to look with respect to the PlayStation on how those games are relatively important.
Okay, I understand that. I guess maybe then I'm saying, but then to take it further, say, well, Call of Duty's not so important or not so. I guess that's what I was quibbling with, that I don't think it necessarily shows that, because you're not looking at all of the Call of Duty dollars spent across platforms.
Correct. My opinion is all of those analyses are with respect to Sony PlayStation.
Dr. Bailey, you did not conduct an analysis of whether Activision content generally is important.
I looked at it with respect to the Sony PlayStation, and I also looked with respect to Xbox
Call of Duty.
for Call of Duty.
For other Activision content you haven't.
So my focus was on Call of Duty. There are tables and charts in my report where I think Overwatch and maybe there's some other of the Activision content appear, but my focus was on Call of Duty.
You were in the courtroom yesterday when Mr. Ryan testified by video.
I was.
You recall his testimony that one of the reasons Sony views Microsoft's current offer to be inadequate is that it does not include Overwatch.
I can take your representation. I don't.
Remember this morning, Mr. Kotick testifying that Diablo 4, which was released on June 6th of this year, sold $666 million in its first 5 days.
Yes, I think that's what he's.
Didn't conduct an analysis of the importance of Diablo.
I looked at Call of Duty because it is of the Activision content that's on mobile. It's large. It's the largest.
$666 million in 5 days. Pretty much.
Remind me, what was that, 2022 or 2020?
That was June 6th of this year.
So I didn't look at it, but in part I didn't look at it because that date when it was released is quite close in time. The data wasn't available to me.
You referenced God of War just a few minutes ago. Do you remember when the last God of War release was?
I don't sitting here right
2017 would seem roughly accurate.
now. I couldn't say one way.
Dr. Bailey, you're not offering an opinion as to whether Activision content drives adoption of the video game platform, right?
Well, I think the analysis that I talked about yesterday about the first game played does speak to that. When I talked about that analysis, the way in which I think about that analysis is what's the reason you purchased that console. It can be interpreted based on what game you're playing on the first day you start playing.
Your opinions in this matter don't include anything about Activision's ability to transition its business from one platform to another.
I'm not sure I understand that question.
Your opinions in this matter don't include anything about Activision's ability to transition its business from one platform to another.
I don't know what you mean by transition. If you have an example, or I could try to.
If you turn to page 149 of your deposition, that's in the white. Page 149, line 10. And you were asked, is it consistent with your opinion that Activision has the ability to transition its business from Xbox to other platforms? Line 3, line 2.
149.
Sorry, this is on line 15. Line 50, line 2, are we there?
Yeah.
Asked, is it consistent with your opinion that Activision has the ability to transition its business from Xbox to other platforms? And you responded, I don't express an opinion about anything about Activision transitioning its Xbox business to other ecosystems. I mean, that's not, I don't even think I have a paragraph that discusses that as a component of my opinion. Is that correct?
Well, I see that, but I also see that I said right before you asked that question that I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm not sure what you're asking that with respect to that bullet point. So I guess I'm consistent that I still don't understand. But I do see that's how I eventually responded. And I see if I kept reading down.
Or just wait for the next question.
Dr. Bailey, could you turn to PX 2463 in your binder? This is confidential, so we're going to hop around it.
Okay, I'm there.
It helps to get you oriented. I don't, if it becomes necessary while we're discussing the document. You cited the attachment to this, on page 66 of your report, you put no authority. I just plan to ask some questions.
Say that one more. There's an attachment to this email.
Right, this exhibit is an email with an attachment. The attachment begins on page 003. Slide titled Microsoft Partnerships Negotiation Update.
Just have 01 and 0.
On PX 2465.
463.
So it's 5, you said 3. You want,
Apologize. PX 2465.
Okay, I'm there.
This is a document, PX 2465, that is cited on page 66 of your report and footnote. Second page, there's a slide deck attached titled Microsoft Partnerships Negotiation Update.
I see that.
Turn to page 2465-005. Be careful here not to discuss any of the details on the slide. The title of the slide is Partnership Negotiation Update. You understand this to be about Overwatch 2 and Diablo 4, partnership between Microsoft and Activision.
Yeah, I could interpret the title like that.
You see the column Microsoft's position in the table.
I do.
Left is another column that has categories of terms, I think, that are laid out in the table.
Talking about the blue column.
See that? And the first row is economics.
Yep, I see that.
Cross position on economics. Without saying it out loud.
I do.
Next row down is publishing requirements. See that?
Yeah.
Third bullet under Microsoft position is services.
I see that.
Take a minute to read the sub bullets into that. And then the next row is media.
I see that.
But there. Is it consistent with your opinions that these are the types of terms that Microsoft seeks from an independent Activision?
Yeah, I, I see what it says here on the page. I see what the title of the column says.
But that's. So let's talk about the but-for world. And that's the world that would exist without the transaction, right?
Yeah, I think that's how we've been using it.
This morning, you heard Mr. Kotick describe incentives for Activision to make its games broadly available across platforms as an independent publisher.
Yes,
You're not offering any opinion as to how the transaction would affect Activision's incentives to contribute its content to rival consoles in the future.
my assignment was to think about other economic questions. But there's another expert who's looking at that.
So you're not offering
No, I'm not.
So you're not offering an opinion as to how the transaction would affect Activision's incentives to contribute its games to content subscriptions.
I see what you mean. Well, my analyses, they speak to that. They, particularly when I look at cross-platform or multi-region play, which we talked about yesterday, it's informative to that. But my opinions don't go the next step to use that word incentive and say what is the incentive. That's not a component of the work that I do.
Cloud subscription services.
That's the whole question.
You're not offering an opinion as to how the transaction would change Activision's incentives to contribute its games to cloud subscription services.
But for a world, can you say that? Ask the question one more time.
You're not offering an opinion as to how the transaction would change Activision's incentives to contribute its games to cloud subscription services.
With the transaction.
Offering an opinion as to the change of the transaction.
No, I'm not.
You agree that there are circumstances under which Activision will agree to contribute its games to content subscription services.
I was here in the courtroom this morning. I heard Mr. Kotick's testimony. I believe him when he testified, and I understand there are a limited set of circumstances when he's done that in the past.
Your critique of the but-for world that Professor Lee describes is based on your interpretation of the data and evidence that exists in these.
My understanding of the documents and testimony is that the but-for world, in the absence of the transaction, is as Mr. Kotick testified earlier this morning, that it would not be on subscription services, and in a way other than the McCabe way he described what he currently does for testing or experiments or marketing, and the same with respect to that.
That understanding, your understanding, is based on interpreting the documents and testimony.
I don't know that I mean, I heard Mr. Kotick testify. I don't know that I was interpreting. I heard him.
I'd like to turn to some questions about how your opinions relate to the effect of the transaction on competition and consumers. The only output expansion that you conclude will result from the transaction is the addition of Activision content to Game Pass.
I think that's right. There is the addition of the Activision content to Game Pass that I talk about, and then I talk about the output expansion with respect to the conditional.
You're not offering any opinion about what the value is that results.
That's not a term that I used in my report.
You didn't determine specifically how a change in output would impact consumer welfare.
No, I did not.
You're not offering an opinion as to whether Microsoft would seek to raise prices of Game Pass again following the addition of Activision content.
That was not a component of my analysis.
With respect to the post-complaint agreements that you referenced, your analysis assumes the existence and effectiveness of the agreements, right?
I guess if what you mean by that I believe people when they enter a contract and they're not entering it like with the willful intent to violate it. I guess that's how I interpret it. That if someone's entered into a contract, they've entered into a contract with the view that they would honor the contract.
Setting aside what their intent might be in entering the contract, you're generally aware of the concept of incomplete contracts.
What? She's not a lawyer. Why are we going into this? I think this is a question for me. Sure.
Dr. Bailey, is there an economic concept of incomplete contracts?
Okay, that's a good.
There is a field of economics that goes under the header of incomplete contracts, which means that it's not about violating contracts. It's about that it's impossible to contract on every possible contingency that might happen.
You're not offering an opinion about the combined firm's incentive to deviate from those complaint agreements.
No, I'm not.
There are some other benefits of the transaction that you identify in paragraph 132 of your report. You're just taking those as given, what you understand Microsoft anticipates will result from the transaction.
Say the paragraph number again.
132. It's all pretty much up there before the appendix.
That's correct. As an economist, when I start my work, it's useful to understand the landscape and the backdrop, and that's all. It was part of the landscape and backdrop.
We heard this morning, we've heard from many witnesses, including Mr. Kotick this morning, about mobile gaming. This morning, Mr. Kotick testified that Activision has improved its mobile capability over the last year. Did you hear that testimony?
I did.
That's all been after the merger agreement was entered into, right?
You would have to represent those dates back to me. I don't remember precisely what dates he was mentioning, but I do remember that the opinion or view. That sounds about right. Yep.
You're not offering an opinion as about how the transaction would affect competition in any mobile, right?
I mean, to the extent that I've put up those two pie charts and I showed that the Xbox share is without memory was 0.3%, and that combined it was 3.8%. That's the extent to which I'm expressing a view. It's tiny. I would not think it would have an effect.
You didn't verify any of the claimed deficiencies of the transaction, is that correct? No.
No.
Oh, it's not correct?
No, I did not.
You did not assess the competitive effects if Call of Duty were to be foreclosed?
But my assignment was not to develop a model like that. A different expert did that.
Did not assess competitive effects if Overwatch were to be foreclosed?
That was not my assignment or the work that I did.
Didn't assess competitive effects if Diablo were to be foreclosed?
Again, that was not the assignment of the economic work that I did.
There was no assessment of competitive effects foreclosure of any Activision content in your report?
The analyses that I did are informative to that. But if you're asking, did I write down a model? That was not my assignment. There's a different expert who worked on a model.
Other questions?
Your Honor, unless you have any questions, we don't have anything further for Dr.
Okay.
Bailey.
Right, Dr. Bailey, you are excused.
Your Honor, if I could, we just, consistent with the ruling yesterday, move RX 5055, which is Dr. Bailey's report.
Okay,
Thank you.
submitted. And did did you want to admit?
At PX 24651.
Yes, admitted. Okay, how long we have, Doctor, Mr. Fisher's?
I understand Mr. Fisher is going to be roughly 27 minutes. Oh, 19, it's even better.
Okay, I'm supposed to be moderating something at noon, so let's just start it. You go, and I'll be late to it. So play.
Very
Yay.
kind, Your Honor.
Mr. Fisher, good morning. My name is James Weingarten. I'm an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission, and I'm going to be asking you some questions today. You understand now that you are under oath as if you were testifying in a courtroom?
I do, yes.
Okay. Is there any reason that you would not be able to testify truthfully and accurately today?
None whatsoever, ever.
Okay. You joined NVIDIA in 1994?
That's right.
You are a senior vice president currently?
I am.
You're responsible for NVIDIA's gaming business unit?
I am.
And is that business unit also referred to as the GeForce unit or GeForce business?
You probably described it as good as anybody has. There's no official name for the business unit.
Okay. And when did you become responsible for the gaming business unit at NVIDIA?
Approximately 2005.
And GeForce, GeForce, is the brand name for NVIDIA's personal computer GPU business, correct?
That's correct.
And GPU stands for graphics processing unit.
That's correct.
And do your responsibilities include responsibility for GeForce Now?
It includes that, yes.
And your responsibilities also include overseeing the sale and business of NVIDIA's GPUs for use in the gaming industry?
Yeah, it does. Yeah,
And GeForce Now is NVIDIA's cloud gaming streaming service, correct?
that's correct.
Would you consider the Xbox Series X to be a high performance console device?
Well, I'm a little biased that way. I think that our products are always better than Xbox Series X. So I would, not from my perspective, but maybe from others. I don't know.
Do you have a similar answer with respect to the PlayStation 5?
It's a relative question. I mean, I believe in PC gaming will always be better than console. So,
Has NVIDIA collaborated in the past with Activision to make titles in the Call of Duty franchise performant on NVIDIA GPU?
we have, yes.
And thinking about the engagements with Activision with regard to collaborating on development of Activision titles, what's the timeline for those collaborations from start to launch of the game?
Good. Thank you.
And putting aside the marketing engagement length, how long would the typical engineering collaboration time be as you're trying to collaborate on a Activision title?
Yeah, I'm not differentiating Activision titles because I don't know of anything specific to Activision titles that is different than other titles. But engineering engagement could start up to a year and a half in advance. A year in advance. I think it's more typical. It would be 6 to 9 months in advance.
Let's please introduce Plaintiff's Exhibit 3103. You remember talking to the CMA in January of 2023.
I do, yes.
And when you made statements to the CMA, were you trying to be truthful and accurate to the best of your ability?
Yes.
When NVIDIA or you provided information to the CMA during that call, did you try to be truthful and accurate to the best of your ability?
Yes.
Do you think the information that NVIDIA provided was truthful and accurate?
I do.
Would you agree that cloud gaming extends video gaming to users with lesser computing PCs?
I would, yes.
Would you agree that cloud gaming extends video gaming to users who have non-Windows devices?
I would, yes.
Is that your view today, that GeForce Now is not cannibalistic to the high-end video game client business?
Yes.
Is it your view today that cloud gaming is expansive to the video game business?
Yes.
Would you agree that GeForce Now's customers are generally using lower-end PCs and not the expensive video-powered video gaming PCs?
Lower end and incompatible systems.
And when you say incompatible, you mean, again, non-Windows based PCs?
That's correct.
So, for example, GeForce Now customers can play PC games, high-end PC games on Mac devices, right?
That's correct.
And a GeForce Now customer can play a high-performing video game on a Chromebook, right?
That's correct.
Would you agree that the vast majority of GeForce Now users are new to gaming or do not have a high-end PC?
The latter, do not have a high-end PC.
Would you agree that many GeForce Now users are in fact new to gaming altogether?
I don't have any data to support that, but I do believe accessibility does bring new gamers to PC gaming. Yes. I see.
Repeat the last.
Yeah, I do believe that accessibility does bring in new gamers to high-end PC gaming.
Does cloud gaming improve accessibility for new users to access and play high-end video games?
Yes.
Does GeForce Now do that too?
Yes. That's my belief.
Do you believe that cloud gaming will ultimately reduce costs for users to play high-end games by moving the games to the cloud?
The cost to the users, yes.
I think we touched on this a little bit before, but would you agree that NVIDIA's cloud gaming offering offers a superior gaming experience to Xbox Series X?
I do, yes. Similar to,
Go ahead, sir.
sorry, I would say similar to or better than, depending on what tier of service you have on GeForce Now.
Would you agree that GeForce Now offers a higher quality gaming experience than PlayStation 5 console?
You know, well, once again, it depends on the tier of service, but I believe that we have the capability of a tier of service that is better, yes.
And do you believe that GeForce Now offers a tier of service to users that offers better quality gaming experience than a Nintendo Switch can offer?
Yes, I mean, it's a much more challenging comparison. The Switch features mobility. It goes after a different customer base, but I mean, in its purest form, in terms of the game experience, yes.
Would you agree that the quality of cloud gaming already matches or exceeds the quality of local gaming?
Yes, it can, for sure.
Would you agree that the quality of cloud gaming is only going to improve with time?
Yes, I would agree with that.
Well, do you view xCloud as a competitor to GeForce Now for attracting gamers who want to game using cloud streaming?
Yes.
GeForce Now offers cloud gaming streaming independent of any subscription service, correct?
It's purely a cloud gaming service. It doesn't have any other products or features tied to it outside of cloud gaming.
Does GeForce Now compete with Amazon Luna for users who want to stream games over the cloud?
I would say yes.
Does GeForce Now compete with PlayStation's cloud offering for users who want to play games over the cloud?
In the same sense that we do xCloud, yes, we do.
Would you agree it's inevitable that gamers who want to play high-end games will move their play into the cloud because of the economics to them of playing over the cloud?
I believe it's inevitable over the course of time. More and more gaming will be resident in the cloud. And economics is one part of it, but it may not be the only motivation.
Would you agree that cloud gaming is not a hypothetical and speculative business that is unlikely to succeed?
I don't, let's see. I want to make sure I answer that right. I believe it is not speculative, and I believe it will ultimately be successful.
You agree that the key impediment to competition and growth in cloud gaming is the availability of content for cloud gaming to stream?
I think that's a very important component, yes.
Do you think that Activision Blizzard games, I'm using the whole company there, Activision Blizzard Inc. games, are important games to be able to offer on cloud streaming to attract gamers?
I do believe they're important games to offer. There are important games on PC within the PC gaming ecosystem, and on our GeForce Direct clients, and therefore important in a cloud gaming service.
Would you agree there's just no question that cloud gaming has a profitable future?
It's my strong belief that cloud gaming has a profitable future, yes.
And in negotiating co-marketing and bundling with Activision, would NVIDIA also discuss bringing Activision games to GeForce Now?
Yes.
Okay. During the GeForce Now beta period, were Activision games available on GeForce Now?
Yes, some Activision games.
Microsoft announced that it would be acquiring Activision in January 2022, correct?
Around, yeah. Don't recall exactly the date, but yes.
Prior to executing GeForce Now listing agreement with Microsoft and a Windows addendum with Microsoft, NVIDIA had expressed concerns about Microsoft's acquisition of Activision, correct?
As it relates to cloud gaming, yes.
Okay. And as part of resolving NVIDIA's concerns about the impact of the Activision acquisition on cloud gaming, NVIDIA also entered into a Windows addendum with Microsoft, right?
That's correct.
Do you have an understanding of the value of the Windows addendum to NVIDIA?
Generally, yes. I don't have a specific dollar amount.
Okay. And what is your general understanding of the value?
It significantly reduces our cost of operating a cloud gaming service.
Any more specific understanding of the value of the Windows addendum to NVIDIA?
Yes, as one of the main pain points in operating a cloud gaming service is that it requires Windows operating system, and the price structure in terms of operating that as it existed were somewhat onerous, and I believe this new agreement significantly reduces the cost and significantly eases the burden of operating a Windows-based cloud gaming service.
The Windows addendum and the Microsoft NVIDIA GeForce Now listing agreement were signed on or about the same day, right?
Yes.
And they were announced together at the same press conference and in the same press release, right?
I don't think we announced the Windows agreement. I think we just announced the GFN agreement.
Strike that. Do you have an understanding of whether the Windows addendum is related to NVIDIA's concern about the Microsoft Activision deal and cloud gaming?
Well, it's related to a competitive cloud gaming environment.
And could you please elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier that to operate a high-end PC cloud gaming service requires Windows. and you know, Microsoft has, that is a different group within Microsoft, but it's related to cloud gaming. And so in order for us, in addition to content, we need to have an economic model that is sustainable. So those license fees to operate a cloud gaming service became part of the discussion.
Okay, if we could pull up RX 0299. And what is it?
This is a release related to the agreement we signed with Microsoft.
The first paragraph of this document states, on Tuesday, Microsoft and NVIDIA announced the companies have agreed to a 10-year partnership to bring Xbox PC gamers the NVIDIA GeForce Now cloud gaming service, which has more than 25 million members in over 100 countries. Was that part of the press release that you agreed to issue after the agreement was signed?
Yes, you know what? I'm sorry to be.
And in this instance, NVIDIA and Microsoft agreed to a 10-year partnership. Is that true?
That's correct.
The press release mentioned that Xbox PC games would now be available to more than 25 million members in over 100 countries. Is that 25 million referring to the number of members or participants in the NVIDIA GeForce Now streaming service?
Yes, we've had 25 million people over the course of time sign up and use GeForce Now, and we refer to the number as the number of members.
And as a result of this agreement, the listing agreement, Xbox PC games would now be available to those users. Is that correct?
That's correct.
The next paragraph states the partnership delivers increased choice to gamers and resolves NVIDIA's concerns with Microsoft's acquisition of Activision Blizzard. NVIDIA, therefore, is offering its full support for regulatory approval of acquisition. Is that still a true statement for NVIDIA sitting here today?
It is.
Do you believe that the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal is good for gamers?
I'm not. Do I believe that Microsoft Activision is good for gamers? I think it is. I don't think it's. I think it's good for gamers. I think it's good for the industry. I mean, I don't. Generally speaking, I have no issue with the Microsoft Activision. The Microsoft acquisition of Activision.
I believe you testified earlier in the deposition that it is your view that cloud gaming is still in its early days. Is that correct?
Yes.
And that cloud gaming is a very small part of the market at this point in time. Is that your view?
It is.
But just to be clear for the record, there were other companies, publishers, that did ask to have their content removed from GeForce Now around that time period. Is that correct?
It was not just Microsoft, or not just Microsoft and ABK.
Other companies included, do you recall Rockstar Games asking for their content to be removed around that time?
I recall in Grand Theft Auto may have been in one of the games. I don't recall all the games.
Like sorry, PX 3103.
Admitted. Okay, we will resume at 1:30. Thank you.
I did.